Hello everyone, my name is Sarah. Today I will be presenting on the peculiarities of suicidal behavior from a sociological perspective. My goal today is to show how suicide is not only an individual act, but also deeply shaped by the social environments that people live in, and how sociology can also be used to prevent suicide in our futures. When most people think about suicide, they view it as something personal or psychological. Sociology takes a different angle. It looks at the patterns, the social factors, pressures, and structures that make some groups more vulnerable than others. So, in this presentation, I'll explain how society shapes suicidal behavior, how sociologist Durkheim studied suicide as a social phenomenon, and why his work still matter today. One idea in sociology is that our behavior is shaped by the social context in which we live. The environments we grow up in, our connections, the stability of our society, all of these things influence people's well-beings. So suicide cannot be understood in isolation, instead reflects the conditions of society itself. As our textbook explains, but social scientists recognize that these seemingly personal troubles, if they occur in patterned ways among large numbers of individuals, reflect important public issues or consequences of social structures. Durkheim was the first sociologist to seriously study suicide. He argued that suicidal behavior is patterned and shaped by the levels of social integration and social regulation in a society. Integration is defined by how connected people feel. Regulation, on the other hand, is how much structure or guidance society provides. Durkheim found that when integration or regulation is too low or too high, suicide rates change in clear, measurable ways. Durkheim identified 4 types of suicide that help us understand these patterns. Egoistic suicide happens when social integration is low, when people feel isolated or disconnected from their communities. Altruistic suicide occurs when integration is way too strong, when someone is so tied to a group that they feel obligated to sacrifice themselves. Anomic suicide appears during periods of low regulation like economic crisis, job loss, or sudden social changes. And fatalistic suicide reflects the opposite, when regulation is too strict and people feel trapped with no sense of freedom or hope. These 4 types of suicide show that suicide is not random, but it is shaped by social conditions. Sociologists continue to see patterns that support Durkheim's findings. Suicide rates often increase during economic instability, unemployment strikes, or times of major social change. We also see differences between groups, for example, between age groups, genders, or occupational categories, which points to social forces at work. All of this reinforces Durkheim's idea that suicidal behavior reflects broader social structures, not just personal struggles. Durkheim's work connects strongly with functionalist theory. Functionalism argues that society is held together by stability, shared norms, and even social order. When society becomes unstable, like during economic hardship or rapid change, people lose direction. That lack of regulation is what Durkheim called anomie. Anomic suicide is a direct example of how breakdowns in social stability can affect behavior. So, suicide becomes a way to examine whether society is functioning in a healthy and stable way. Even though Durkheim wrote in the late 1800s, his ideas still apply today. Social media comparison, online isolation, job insecurity, and economic uncertainty all create environments where regulations and integrations shift. People today often talk about feeling disconnected, overwhelmed, pressured, or unstable, all of which tie directly into Durkheim's framework. Understanding suicide sociologically helps in 2 big ways. First, it shifts the focus away from blaming individuals and instead looks at the social conditions and increased risk. Second, it helps researchers and policymakers design better support systems that address social connection, stability, and belonging, and mental health access. It shows that suicide is tied to society, and if society changes, then the risk can change too. In conclusion, suicidal behavior is influenced by many social factors: connection, stability, pressure, and regulation. Durkheim works shows that suicide reflects the condition of society itself, not just the internal world of individuals. By understanding these patterns, sociology gives us tools to better support people and build environments that reduce the risk. Thank you for listening.